Good morning. Welcome to OCASI's Biennial Professional Development Conference, People, Power, Impact, the Future of Immigration. It is so wonderful to welcome over 500 of my colleagues from the immigrant and refugee serving sector, from across Ontario, and our friends from across Canada. We also welcome some of our friends working in other sectors who will be spending the next 2 days with us. Before we open the conference formally, some housekeeping. If you have not yet done so, please, at the bottom of your screen, you will see the interpretation button. Please choose your language of choice. The conference will be simultaneously translated in English and French. If you are having difficulties over the next few days, please send an email to conference@ocasi.org or a message to Stephanie Brown via Feedloop, via private message on Feedloop. And I am sure that those of you who are far more technically savvy than I am know exactly what that means. During our plenary sessions, like the session we are in right now, any questions that you may have, please use your Q&A button in the middle of the viewing window. The public chat in Feedloop cannot be seen by our speakers, so please, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box on Feedloop, which is in the bottom of your screen. And now on to our conference. I am joining you today from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto, where OCASI is located and where I live, is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, which was signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the William Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Toronto, importantly, is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon territory treaty is between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, as well as all peoples from around the world who now call Toronto, Ontario, and Canada their homes, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Welcome to OCASI's conference. As Ontario and the world emerges from pandemic lockdowns and isolation, we look ahead to building more equitable and just communities where all refugees and migrants are welcome. The people of Ontario's immigrant and refugee serving sector are central to the future we imagine, a future powered by our collective potential. Power, people, impact, the future of immigration. We have a great treat for you to start off our conference. In early September 2021, we sent a call out to OCASI member agencies. We asked you to share your pandemic stories. We asked you to tell us how you have supported refugees, immigrants, and migrants during this very difficult health crisis. It is my great pleasure to share with you the first 3 stories we have received, and we know there will be many, many more to come. The first submission comes from Mayar Shaheen, an intake worker and community ambassador at TNO, the neighborhood organization, which is based here in Toronto. Amy? Play video, please. We seem to be having some technical difficulties with the video, so we will continue. We also received submissions. Amy, if you can put up the slide instead. We also received submissions from Ishrat Jahan, the community ambassador, also from the neighborhood organization. Ishrat's submission is titled, Being a Part of Toronto's History. Many of you would know that TNO was very much involved in getting vaccine information as well as holding a series of vaccine clinics throughout the neighborhood where they are located. Our next submission is from Isis Ambrosio Brito, a settlement counselor at Immigrant Women's Services in Ottawa. Isis writes about the challenge of working from home as a settlement counselor during the pandemic. You can read Isis' complete story on the OCASI website. We know our sector has many more stories to share from across Ontario. This is our chance to show off the incredible work that people at OCASI member agencies have done throughout the pandemic and continue to do. Send in your stories about your experiences in English and French, whether it is a video, an audio clip, a photo, a written paragraph, or two. We will feature them all on the OCASI website, and we hope you can share them with your communities, your clients, and your networks. Thank you. And thank you for that, Amy. We look forward to hearing about your stories. And apologies for that video not showing. I was absolutely looking forward to it. And now for one of our special part of our conference, and probably this is, I love this, that we started doing about a decade ago, Ideas That Ignite. There's a new energy in the immigrant and refugee serving sector in Ontario. We have many young leaders that have emerged, young leaders that have been making a difference, that continue to demonstrate that services are not the only thing that we do, who bring a sense of advocacy and a sense of urgency to the work that we do, knowing that if immigrants and refugees are to be successful here in Ontario and across the country, that we must begin to address issues of systemic barriers that many face. Issues of housing and homelessness, issues of underemployment, issues of decent work, issues of childcare are all immigrant and refugee community issues. We have three dynamic speakers this morning. I will introduce them in the order that they will speak. They will each speak for 3 minutes. If you hear me clapping after 3 minutes, don't be surprised, or I will be saying thank you. They know I'm not being rude. We're just keeping everybody's time. Our first speaker will be Allos Abis. Allos currently works as a settlement counselor for the Caregiver Support Program at Working Women Community Center here in Toronto. He has been involved in organizing initiatives related to migrant justice, immigration detention, and improving access to care for racialized trans people. Allos will be followed by Kaylee Perez. Kaylee is a passionate refugee advocate who holds an MA in Peace and Conflict Studies and has worked in the settlement sector since 2013. Add being raised in a Cuban, Colombian, Palestinian family in Canada, and you learn what has fueled her love for peace work, both locally and abroad. And following Kaylee will be Kojo Damptey. Kojo Damptey is an interdisciplinary scholar, practitioner, musician, and decolonial advocate. His work revolves around communication, music, African culture, African politics, international development, and social movements. Born in Ghana, he moved to Hamilton in 2001 to pursue a degree in chemical engineering at McMaster University. Please welcome the three brilliant ideas that ignite. Allos, you have the floor.
Another Black life organizer reminded me to first acknowledge the legacy of Black Caribbean women in migrant justice organizing and the struggle against anti-Black racism in Canada. Our work today would not exist without the activism of who we recognize as the 7 Jamaican mothers. Their names are Elizabeth Lodge, Carmen Hughes, Eliza Cox, Elaine Pert, Rabina White, Gloria Lawrence, and Lola Anderson. They fought for the right for caregivers to become permanent residents and reunite with their families in Canada. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this morning to pretend your boss is right in front of you. Yeah, your boss. Now imagine living with that boss inside their house, working at their beck and call for 12 hours a day. You clean their house, their 5 bathrooms, take care of their kids, listen to their problems, make 3 meals, walk their dog, while you try to catch a moment to grab a bite and check in with your child. Such a typical day in the life of a migrant living caregiver. Imagine during the first wave, boss says, we're on lockdown and you're not allowed to go outside, but not to pursue a new hobby or get a dog. It's to work 7 days a week for months on end. And so we start hearing from caregivers who, for several months, couldn't even go to the grocery store to get food or toiletries, to be able to go out for walks. Overwhelmed, isolated, verbally and physically abused, and yet were they even safe from COVID? Caregivers still got COVID from their employers' weekend skiing trips. The open work permit from vulnerable workers may have offered a ticket out of these situations, but the effect of the abuse lasts. Exhausted and avoidant of regular checkups for fear of medical inadmissibility, we have seen a rise of cancer diagnoses amongst caregivers. So here we are to thank those who took care of Canada during the pandemic. They were given the TR to PR pathway, which rolled out a Hunger Games-esque competition where the ones who can book a self-test test the fastest can get a spot. Meanwhile, only refugees who prove they provided direct patient care within a very narrow time period can apply for PR through a one-time only program. And undocumented workers, well, good luck to you apparently. And with Canada still locking up immigration detainees in provincial jails indefinitely, old problems still remain. Our sector can only materialize genuine post-pandemic recovery if we remain united in our struggle against crises that preceded COVID and intensified the impacts of the pandemic. Anti-Black racism, settler colonialism, Islamophobia, xenophobia. Thank you for having me today and looking forward to connecting and learning from each other over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Allos. Hello, everyone. My name is Kaylee Perez. I join you from the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and most recently the Haudenosaunee people. I'm excited to be here with you today. So what moves and inspires me in my work right now? Circles, and not just the hoop earrings that I love to wear every day, but the big and small spaces where people come together to meaningfully listen, see, and serve one another. Models of support that wrap around and center the needs of individuals and families. The work of refugee resettlement exists at this intersection of real pain and a desire for peace. The existence of refugees and the worsening global refugee crisis is a painful, tragic reality. The resettlement of refugees does not address the root causes of forced migration, but it is an important piece of the response puzzle, and it ultimately saves lives. And so it's this peace building tool that we get to use in response to painful tragedy. As xenophobia, fear of the other continue to grow, our programs provide a practical response. Proximity. When you get to do life face to face with people who are different from you, this other that was once feared becomes friend or even family. A few years ago, I was involved in facilitating the sponsorship of a refugee family who was resettled to a rural community in Northern Ontario. As the group of sponsors got the house they rented ready, the neighbor came outside to ask what was going on. As one sponsor explained, the refugee family would be moving in soon. The neighbor responded with anger, saying, "How dare you resettle this refugee family here without consulting us? I've lived here for many years. I've cared for my property. Having a refugee family live here will seriously devalue my property, and I'm not okay with this." The sponsor, not really knowing what to say, said, "See ya," and warned the group about this hostile neighbor. The family arrived, and being as most newcomer families are, they lived their hospitality out loud. They would wave and smile, bring leftover food, help with the garden. And a month or two later, as the newcomer family and sponsors enjoyed a barbecue in the backyard, the same neighbor came over to that same sponsor and apologized. He said, "This family has completely transformed my idea of who I thought refugees were." Proximity broke down the fear and prejudice that this man had carried for who knows how long. I get excited thinking about the ways that we can strengthen and grow collaboration between sponsors and settlement providing organizations, grow the ways that we invite community into refugee resettlement so that our work in Canada becomes a whole of society approach, growing our circle and deepening our commitment to refugee welcome and integration. And so in these polarizing times, may we dream of circles, thinking about the ways that we can move toward one another. Thank you.
Kojo, you're on.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Allos. Thank you, Kaylee. Today, as we center people and talk about the power that they have and the impact that they have on their communities, I wanted to talk about a big word or a small word, whichever one you gravitate to. And that word is abolition. ABOLITION. Where does it come from? It comes from the belly of Black women that were stolen from their lands, the lands of the African continent. Forced migration through slavery is something that we see the effects today. In an article written by Saidiya Hartman, she talks about how slavery constricted the womb, deciding the fate of the unborn and reproducing slave property by making the mark of the mother a death sentence for their children. Children like George Floyd, children like Andrew Loco, children like Regis Koczynski-Paquette, and many more. Slave women working in domestic labor in white households experiencing forms of violence, the violence that Allos talked about. Some Black women practice infanticide rather than to sentence their children to the social death and the auction block of the master. And these are the effects we still see here today when we are talking about anti-Black racism. What does this mean for our work moving forward when we talk about immigration? It means that we have to realize that this is not a multicultural society that we are told. It is actually an assimilating society that hides its history. When we realize the unmarked graves of Indigenous children. And those are the things that we should be centering when we talk about immigration, when we talk about the work that we're doing. In the prison system, we see the overrepresentation of Black, racialized, and Indigenous populations. What does that mean for our work moving forward? Today, what I talk about is centering Black women like the Combahee River Collective that talked about developing an integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that major systems of oppressions are interlocking. The same violence that we see in Haiti is the same violence that we see in Afghanistan. So if we're going to call Canada home and then not give Indigenous communities and nations the voices and the space that they need, what type of society are we building? And so I leave you with that big word and that small word, abolition, ABOLITION. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Allos. Thank you, Kaylee. Thank you, Kojo. What a dynamic way to start the morning. The sector is vibrant, I'm telling you, with this new young leadership. Moving on to our keynote speaker. It is always such a pleasure to listen to Senator Kim Pate. I will do a brief bio, Senator, so I'll give you some time. Oh, there you are. Senator Kim Pate was appointed to the Senate of Canada on November 10th, 2016. First and foremost, the mother of Michael and Madison. She is also a nationally renowned advocate who has spent the last 40 years working in and around the legal and penal system of Canada, and with and on behalf of some of the most marginalized, victimized, criminalized, and institutionalized, particularly imprisoned youth, men, and women. Senator Pate graduated from Dalhousie Law in 1984 with an honors in clinical law program. She was the executive director of the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies from 1992 until her appointment in the Senate in 2016. She has developed and taught prison law, human rights and social justice, and defending battered women on trial courses at the faculties of law at the University of Ottawa, Dalhousie University, and the University of Saskatchewan. She also occupied the Allos Chair in Human Rights at the University of Saskatchewan College of Law in 2014 and 2015. Senator Pate is widely credited as the driving force behind the inquiry into certain events at the Prison for Women in Kingston, headed by Justice Louise Arbour. During the inquiry, she supported women as they aired their experiences and was a critical resource and witness in the inquiry itself. Senator Pate is a member of the Order of Canada, a recipient of the Governor General's Award in commemoration of the person's case, which we're celebrating this month, and the Canadian Bar Association's Bertha Wilson Touchstone Award, and 6 honorary doctorates: the Law Society of Upper Canada, the University of Ottawa, Carleton University, St. Thomas University, Wilfrid Laurier University, and Nipissing University. Senator Pate, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. And it's a tremendous honor and huge responsibility to be invited by this amazing organization. Thank you very much. I join you from the territory, the Mi'kma'ki, the territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm actually at the airport in Halifax, getting ready to go to the Truro Prison for Women shortly with some of my colleagues. I also want to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, most of the time on Turtle Island, otherwise known to many people as Ottawa. And I also want to recognize the colonial impact of forced labor and exploitation for so many people. I don't need to explain any of that to any of you, because that's the work that you and your hundreds of organizations have been doing for more than 40 years, and I thank you for that. I also want to thank a huge appreciation for Allos, Kaylee, and Kojo. I actually would have preferred to listen to all of you for the next time. What I propose to do is talk a little bit about the work that we're trying to do and when I say we, it's the team that I have the privilege of working with, both those who are in my office, but also now in the Senate. Talk a little bit about that and then get to a discussion, because it's always far more engaging if we can talk about what we can be doing together, and you holding us to account for the things that we need to continue to do. I often describe the work we're doing as under one general category of the 3 Ds, the decolonizing, decriminalizing, and decarcerating. And those of you who know the work that I've been doing for the last while, I certainly, Kojo speaks to my heart. Thank you, and actually all of you, but in particular some of the work around trying to deinstitutionalize in so many ways, including immigration detention. So many people aren't aware that one of the role of senators is to represent what's often referred to as, and I put it in quotes because I don't particularly like the language, minority interests. The interests of those who elected officials often don't represent, because they're not the sorts of issues that get them elected. So they are issues that generally relate to economic, social, racial, gender discrimination and disparity. And it's trite to say it now, but the things that if you weren't aware of them, if you were living in a bubble, a very privileged bubble, which many of my colleagues have been for many years, you may not have been aware of some of these inequities until the pandemic hit. And even then, many people are still insulated within the shadow of where I live and work. There are many people working full-time jobs, particularly racialized women, who are living in homeless shelters because they had to go to one minimum wage full-time job rather than the 2 or 3 that they were living before. And therefore, in 90% of the communities in this country, in Canada, a rich country, they can't afford to rent 1-bedroom apartments. So I feel like I don't even need to say this to all of you. So let me talk about what I am trying to do in the sphere I have. Part of the reason when I was approached that I finally agreed to accept being nominated to the Senate was the equality work that I hope we can continue to do. And so we continue to try and breathe life into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of this country and the human rights promises. Too much of what exists on paper does not exist in reality for folks on the ground. So some of you will be familiar with the work we've been doing on guaranteed livable income and trying to marry that with pharmacare, housing strategy, free post-secondary education, mental health, dental, as well as eye care, and of course, childcare. But even if childcare is $5 or $10 a day, if you don't have money, it's still out of reach. We know that subsidized positions don't go to those who are most in need of those subsidized positions. They're limited. And so we need to really have a robust economic, social, and health recovery system. So that's some of what we're trying to work on. Some of you will be familiar with getting other senators. 50 of us wrote to the Prime Minister near the beginning of the pandemic, urging that the benefits that are now supposed to expire soon not only continue, but be morphed into something like a guaranteed livable income so that those individuals who are currently living below the poverty line would be able to not just survive, but work towards developing a thriving process. So that's something we continue to work on. I'm also working with some colleagues on how do we how do we actually deal with the gig economy and the future of work in this country in a way that actually recognizes what that looks like for everybody, not just the most privileged. We're also, some of you will be familiar with the work we did for 4.5 years through the Human Rights Committee, chaired in part by an amazing colleague who's from this territory, from Preston, Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, and others who really tried to expose what's been happening in our prison system. And part of the reason we're going today is a number of the senators, after the legislation that allowed the expansion, not the elimination of segregation happened, a number of our colleagues came and said, if the government isn't going to hold to account the prison system, we have to do our part. And so many people didn't realize until we were talking about it in the Senate that senators, members of parliament, and judges have a right of access to federal penitentiaries. And part of that right of access is the responsibility of going in, documenting the conditions of confinement. So for those of you doing the work on abolition and on decriminalization and all of this work, we are taking photos, we are doing reports. Thus far, we haven't published anything since the human rights report, but certainly I've been providing it to counsel, lawyers who are bringing court action against the government, that sort of thing. So bear that in mind if there are ways that would be of assistance to you as well. We also are, some of you will be aware, we have an opportunity to introduce private bills when the government doesn't fulfill its obligations. And the current government, when they were elected in 2015, were elected on a platform that they would actually do something about things like mandatory minimum penalties, about records and that sort of thing. So 2 private bills that I've introduced 3 times, they've died on the order paper. But 4th time, maybe that's the dream number, and we're going to introduce them again as soon as we start sitting. One is to allow judges the discretion to not impose mandatory minimum penalties, including prison sentences. Some of you will be familiar that the government has said they are going to reintroduce Bill C-22, which was the one that would get rid of some mandatory minimum penalties. The government characterized it as reducing the numbers of Indigenous prisoners and Black prisoners, those of African descent and other racialized prisoners. The reality is that bill would do nothing of the sort. And so one of the things that the senators of African descent and Indigenous senators and our office came together and proposed ways that they could actually achieve that, if that was really the objective. And in fact, the then Minister of Justice acknowledged that the only critique they had of Bill C-22 was not what they were worried about, that it would be seen as soft on crime and all those, political interests they had, but that in fact it did not go far enough. So a number of us are working on, even before the bill is introduced, to try and ensure that it has that piece in. I will still introduce the private bill in the to keep the pressure on to actually have that bill achieve what it's supposed to. So stay tuned. And if any of you are interested in more information about that bill, we've sent, I think we sent some material. When I say the royal we, I think Emily from our office sent some material, and we're happy to have, anything that's available that we are working on, feel free to use it. We also will reintroduce a bill to allow convictions to expire. Right now, to get records, there are four types, sorry, I'm putting up five fingers, but 4 ways that people can have a record expiry or a pardon or a suspension. And we saw with the cannabis as well as the gay purge bill, as I call it, that got rid of the records for those individuals who had historical convictions related to either being gay or lesbian at that time, and now, of course, being part of the entire 2+ LGBTQ2S plus community, would actually have access to record suspension. The reality is very few people applied for it. It's still a cumbersome process. So the bill would actually get rid of the bureaucracy of the application process, but also the fees, and would allow for records to expire. It's not the best approach. It still doesn't cover everything, but it was one step towards. And then the other is we're trying to, that many of you will be interested in, and we did the work on this bill, but it will likely be introduced by Senator Jaffer or one of the other senators who's part of our, what we call our immigration working group. And that is a bill to basically say that if the state takes into care, i.e. becomes the parent of young people who have come as refugees or immigrants, they cannot suck and blow at the same time. They cannot say, we are your parent, and then not get them full immigration status. And so this bill would say that if someone has been in the care of the state and is subsequently criminalized, they cannot be deported. In fact, the bill right now says they should be granted immigration status. There is some debate amongst some of my colleagues as to whether that goes too far. Personally, I think it doesn't even go far enough, but that's some of the discussion. Again, if you're interested, feel free to share your views with us. The other things we're working on is trying to ensure that we actually do see the rollback of segregation, the elimination of segregation, and decarceration strategies. And so we'll continue to work on that. Some of you will be aware that we're trying to do that through the Human Rights Committee, the Aboriginal Peoples Committee, the Legal Committee, Finance Committee, Social Affairs Committee, things like Emancipation Day recognition, things like Truth and Reconciliation Day recognition, things like trying to do this within a sustainable way. So we're doing it with a group called Peers from the Planet internationally, who are looking at how do we actually build forth, not just recognizing GDP as a sign of recovery coming out of this pandemic, but human well-being and planet well-being. And so some of you will also be aware that I'm part of, as the only out woman so far in Parliament, I'm part of the Global Equality Caucus, and we're trying to ensure that safety internationally. And also I have had the privilege and responsibility of visiting with people like Gary and Sangari and others, immigration detention, and trying to eliminate those instead of building new centers, actually decarcerate from immigration detention as well. So I love your theme of people, power, and impact, and the importance of moving forward, and we will continue to do that. The ideas that ignite are vitally important. And I also want to do finally, and not least, but most importantly for me, the ability to engage with young people. Some amazing young people have ignited us within our office. So me, a techno-twit, someone who, is not as comfortable with all of these technological things as has been inspired by young people like the amazing Rakesh Walters, who's a young lawyer who came through our office and said, let's do a podcast. So we do Appointed. Some other young women, Maggie, who's originally from, whose family came here from Lebanon, and said, why aren't you doing TikToks? And I'm thinking, I'm not singing and dancing, and nobody wants to see, weird white girl doing that. So she said, no, we can do substance in TikTok. So we're doing that. And I continue to be inspired by so many people. So I want to thank you again for this incredible privilege and honor and responsibility of being able to join you. And I hope that you can, well, I know you will continue to inspire. I don't expect you to tell me how to do my job but you are now part of who I consider my accountability circle in terms of my community and those who will help me when I fail to acknowledge or understand that I've made a mistake or that I need to move in a certain direction. I now include you as part of those who I hope will hold me to account and push me forward. So thank you very much. Thank you for the incredible work you continue to do, and thank you to every single one of you for every day being part of this amazing organization.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you, Senator Pate, for such
Oh,
a
no, please just call me Kim, please.
You know, I will gladly do that. So thank you, Kim. There are lots of folks who are saying thanks for all of your work. Nina Lamba says, thanks, Senator Pate, for guaranteed low income and vulnerable people who have lost and for continuing to fight around to amend Bill C-22. There's one question for you. Is from Leah Woolner, a colleague at OCASI from Montreal. She says, I have worked with many migrant women who have not been eligible to receive last resort financial assistance or welfare because of their immigration status. How can we make sure that a guaranteed livable income or universal basic income is accessible to all non-citizens and non-permanent residents, such as temporary workers and other migrants, including those who are undocumented?
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important, vital question because so much, even social assistance, as you know, is sometimes unavailable to folks. So the mechanism and the model that we're looking at would actually do away with some of those myths and stereotypes around poor people, racialized people, people who are new to the country, and talk about as a right of access coming into this country, you would have access to a guaranteed livable income. It's important. I think it's important to say that I don't support a universal basic income. I support a universally accessible, but I don't want to see a demo grant of money going to rich folk. That, you know, as my former colleague, Art Eggleton, who was an accountant, said, you know, when you have money going to rich people, they spend a lot of money trying to protect it. Whereas we know that money that goes to people who are living close to or below the poverty line, every dollar that gets invested, we know from what's happened with the child benefit, we know from the guaranteed income supplement, which are already basic income initiatives for families with children and for seniors, that every dollar in fact generates $2 in the economy. So I don't generally like to look at the financial piece. I'm more interested in the human issues, but I absolutely agree. And so if you see things in what we've proposed in our perspectives document, which I think is available to folks, if not, just email and we'll make sure you get a copy. We're looking at those kinds of issues. We think that we need to get rid of the stigma and the moralization and the policing of people's income and instead provide people with the resources they need and not stigmatize them because they either choose not to or cannot, or it's not safe for them to engage in the work that they have access to, if at all.
Kim, we were so glad to hear you speak about children in care who then become criminalized and face possible deportation because of their the lack of immigration status or permanency. What can we as a sector do? I'm sure you're aware that there is a coming court challenge on this. How can we as a sector help to amplify those messages, given the work that's happening with you and some of your colleagues in the Senate?
I think one of the things you can do is ensure that the lawyers know that we're trying to get this legislation through. And I would be happy to share the substance of it. We're not supposed to share the details until it's tabled, but I would be happy to share the substance of it. And the fact that we are having those kinds of discussions in the Senate, one of my mistakes I made, if I can put it that way, in my first couple of weeks in the Senate is when the immigration bill was coming forward, I tried to help and amend it. I was so, I have to say, naive in the sense of the political. Had never been a politician, had never, for all kinds of reasons, I couldn't get behind any party's platform. And so when I saw that the bill was flawed in this way, I suggested that I amend it. That that then I was told would stall the entire thing. And so some progressive amendments that were made didn't go forward. But those debates are available. And so if there's are ways that we can get those to the lawyers, if you want to write to all of the senators in Ontario, or because I know OCASI is based in Ontario, but if you want to write to all the Ontario senators and MPs and say you want to see a piece of legislation like this, that couldn't hurt at all. We know that Minister Mendocino, as he then was, I don't know if he still will be, was somewhat in favor. He was concerned it went too far, what we were proposing, but any suggestion, an email to them, call to them, I think would be beneficial. And again, if you see things, we've consulted with a number of the lawyers who are working on these cases, and that's how we came up with the legislation, because of course, none of us achieves anything alone. It's the collective efforts that move things forward. So thank you very much for raising that.
Thank you. That's the questions we have for you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Kim Pate, Senator, continue to do the progressive work. I can't begin to tell you how thrilled we are that you are in the position that you are now and that you are surfacing, and not only speaking about it, but acting to make real systems change around some of these issues that we've grappled with for so many, many decades here in Canada. Have a wonderful day. Looking forward to your continuing work around abolition and prison reform. Thank you, Senator Pate.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your meeting and conference. And keep up the great work. You're amazing.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, folks, we are actually going to give you almost 40 minutes break. Please come back to our opening panel, Fighting for Our Future, Countering Racism, Hate and Intolerance. We have a dynamic panel for you. Please remember to complete your evaluation form, which will pop up at the end of this session. Bear with me, I'm looking for, I believe that there is one more question, but we've lost Senator Pate. Sultana Jahangir, who is from South Asian Women's Rights Organization located here in Toronto, said that she's worked with racialized immigrant women who worked in precarious labor market, even though they are skilled immigrants and are unable to get a job at their skilled related field. We feel underemployment is the root cause of all problem. What systems change do we need to address mass underemployment? Sultana, this is such a good issue that I'm so thrilled that you continue to raise. There's actually a statement out from the provincial government this morning, I believe, that looks to how it is that we can begin to remove some of the barriers, especially to the regulated professions. I do not believe it goes far enough, which is no surprise, but at least it has gotten on the provincial government's agenda. So we as a collective need to continue to push on these issues. OCASI has been working with our colleagues at World Education Services, WES, which is our premier accreditation service here in Canada, as well as with some of our member organizations like Niagara Folk Arts, who have been working particularly with health professionals given the pandemic. We believe that the health pandemic was such a wasted, missed opportunity for us here in Ontario and across the country to begin to utilize the great skills and education that health professionals who are trained internationally bring with them and who are here underemployed and not able to work in their field. So thank you for continuing to keep this issue on our agenda. Lots of conversations to have over the next 2 days. Please complete your evaluation form for this opening session. We will see you in 30 minutes at 10:30 at our opening panel on anti-racism. And I just lost the name of it, Fighting for Our Future, Countering Racism, Hate and Intolerance. Have a great morning. See you at 10:30.